I am Arthur Urbano, Professor of Theology and Chair of the Jewish Catholic Theological Exchange Committee at Providence College. The JCTE was established in 2007 to develop programming that promotes Catholic and Jewish engagement, especially in the areas of theology and biblical studies. To this end, we launched a lecture series in 2009, and I'm happy to say we are now in our 14th year. And it's good to see so many of you here today. With the 2023-2024 academic year, we're launching an exciting new initiative, the Scholar-in-Residence in Jewish Studies and Jewish Christian Relations. As visiting faculty in the Providence College community, the Scholar-in-Residence will bring academic expertise and teaching excellence in Jewish studies, together with a commitment to interreligious dialogue through teaching, engagement with the PC community and the local community, and academic presentations. As many of you know, this has been in the works for more than a decade. And thanks to the commitment of the theology department and the administration of the college to this initiative, I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Benny Bar-Lavi today as our inaugural Scholar-in-Residence. And this online event is sort of a preview of what's to come in the academic year, when we'll have a more formal welcome for Benny on campus in the fall. So just some logistics for today. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website, jewish-catholic.providence.edu. You can also find recordings of other past events there as well as more information on the work of the JCTE. During Dr. Bar-Lavi's presentation, I would ask you to kindly make sure that you are muted. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions. If you have a question, there's two ways to pose them. Either with the raise hand feature, you can do that, and I'll call on you, or you may type your question into the Q&A feature, and I'll read the question out. Please keep your questions brief and to the point so that there's time for as many questions as possible. Our plan for today is to go for about an hour or so. So now let me introduce Dr. Benny Bar-Lavi. Dr. Bar-Lavi joins us from the Department of History at the University of Chicago, where he received his PhD and has served as a postdoctoral fellow in the social sciences. He's an intellectual historian focusing on early modern political theology, the Western Sephardic diaspora, and early modern Spain. His current book project, titled Politics Against God, Judaism and Islam and the Political Theological Discourses of Early Modernity, examines how Judaism and Islam became protagonists in the debates surrounding politics and religion that shook Europe during early modernity. His scholarship has been supported by the Association for Jewish Studies, the European Research Council, the Political Theology Network, the Joyce Z. and Jacob Greenberg Center for Jewish Studies, and the Division of Social Sciences at the University of Chicago. As Scholar-in-Residence at PC, Dr. Bar-Lavi will teach courses in Jewish Christian relations, provide opportunities to present his research, engage with students and the local Jewish community through other educational opportunities. So the title of his talk today is An Assembly for the Sake of Heaven, the New Testament and the Providential Role of Christianity in the Thought of Rabbi Jacob Emden. So welcome, Benny, to Providence virtually. You're not here yet in Providence, but you will be shortly. And so now I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you for the kind words. Okay, let's begin. Can you all see the presentation? All right. Before we start, I just want to give you a quote, a section from a text that has become very, very famous in the last years. It is called, one moment, please. All right. To do the will of our Father in heaven. It is a text written on December 3rd, 2015 by the Center of Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation, issued by Orthodox rabbinical authorities on Jewish Christian dialogue. And there's a text. As Maimonides and Bar-Lavi, we acknowledge that the emergence of Christianity in human history is neither an accident nor an error, but the willed divine outcome and gift to the nations. In separating Judaism and Christianity, God willed a separation between partners with significant theological differences, not a separation between enemies. And then the text goes on to quote Rabbi Jacob Emden. Jesus brought a double goodness into the world. On the one hand, he strengthened the Torah of Moses majestically. Not only and not one of our sages spoke out more emphatically concerning the immutability of the Torah. On the other hand, he removed idols from the nations and obligated them in the 7 commandments of Noah, so that they would not behave like animals in the field, and instill them firmly with moral traits. Christians are a congregation that work for the sake of heaven. We're destined to endure, whose intent is for the sake of heaven, and whose rewards will not be denied. So in this talk, I will try to trace the historical background and the larger significance of Emden's attitudes towards Christianity, an attitude that has had a lot of influence both during his time and especially during our time. And I will try to do it particularly as it emerges from his analysis of the New Testament and his understanding of Christianity's providential role in history. A few words about Jacob Emden before we begin. It's very important for context. Jacob Emden lived during the 18th century, was born in 1697, died in 1776, was born in Altona, which is today part of a suburb of Hamburg, but at the time was part of the Kingdom of Denmark. He lived there most of his life. He was a descendant of a formidable rabbinic family, educated by his father, who was another illustrious rabbi by the name of Tzvi Ashkenazi, a staunch opponent of Sabbatianism. Emden is one of the most prolific rabbis of the middle of the 18th century. His extensive works cover virtually every aspect of Jewish intellectual history, including commentaries on the Bible, on the Mishnah, the Talmud, the prayer book, almost 400 responsum, Jewish grammar. And he was, by the way, a superb linguist. Emden is probably best known to historians for his opposition to the Sabbatian movement. But in the world of Torah learning, he is first and foremost known as the Yavitz, which is his acronym. And if you go to any yeshiva today, you will probably find some of his works there. This is just to give you an example. This is Emden's comments on a page of the Talmud. And these are some of his most famous works, which, again, one will probably find in any yeshiva, and any student of rabbinical literature will be able to discuss this with you. Now, notwithstanding his bona fide status as a rabbinical authority, Emden was, if we may use the term, somewhat of an odd bird, very, very unusual for his time and place. In the first place, he possessed an extensive knowledge of what we would call secular studies that was quite unusual for an observant Jew at the time. Emden was familiar with the culture and the science of his day, and he was particularly interested in medicine. He had a grasp of German, Dutch, and even Latin. Second, Emden used philology, history, and grammar to produce original and often bold studies of Jewish texts, most famously his criticism of the Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah. He wrote a surprisingly candid autobiography, which I think has a lot of literary merit, in which he tells frankly about his marriages, business failures, and other things, which is a rare source for early modern Jewish history. And crucially, he owned and operated a printing press in Altona, which he used to disseminate his views. Emden was, as it were, a blogger of the 18th century, a vehement, fearless, active, and influential, and rather confrontational blogger, as it were. Now, interestingly, though not incidentally, he never really held, except for 3 years, in an official rabbinic position. He was not answerable to a board of trustees, and he was not tied to the prevailing opinions of any community. And this is crucial, again, because he allowed him to take an independent and highly critical position on a variety of subjects. Emden lived long enough to see the Enlightenment, the Jewish Enlightenment, and he corresponded with Moses Mendelssohn. There was a lot of mutual respect between the two, at least at times. However, he firmly rejected what he held to be non-traditional religious assumptions and goals of the Jewish Enlightenment and the Enlightenment. Now, Emden's independent and nonconformist and uncompromising approach found its most famous expression in his opposition to Sabbatianism. This is, I think, a crucial point in order to understand his attitudes towards Christianity. Just a brief word about Sabbatianism. Shabtai Tzvi lived from 1626 to 1676, was at first considered by probably a vast majority of the Jewish world as the Messiah. However, things took a turn for the worse when he converted to Islam in 1666. His conversion, along with his heterodoxy, scandalous antinomianism, his emphasis on redemption through sin, and the failure to end the Jewish exile or rebuild the temple, resulted in his labeling as a false Messiah by the vast majority of Jews. Nevertheless, pockets of crypto-Sabbatians remained from time to time, and raised their heads. Emden would devote much of his effort to the eradication of Sabbatianism, which he saw as a mortal threat to Judaism and to the people of Israel. The fight against Sabbatianism would become his life's work, his passion, and most famously in his accusation of arguably the greatest rabbi of his age, Jonathan Eibeshitz. Emden accused Jonathan Eibeshitz of being a secret Sabbatian. I'll say this again. Jacob Emden accused perhaps the most respected rabbi of his age of being an utter idolatrous heretic. I cannot stress how outrageous this was, and I cannot go into this whole episode, though I will say this, that modern scholarship tends to think that Emden was right and that Eibeshitz was in fact a Sabbatian. Now, this is crucial because one of the most problematic points that Emden, one of the central themes of Emden's critique, both of Sabbatianism and of Eibeshitz specifically, was that there was a syncretistic Jewish-Christian element that was profoundly antinomian. Later on, Emden took a leading role in attempts to suppress another Sabbatian movement with significant elements, again, of Jewish-Christian syncretism headed by Jacob Frank. And he would go as far as arguing that the followers of these new Sabbatian movement, the Frankists, as they're currently known, ought to be tried as heretics by the Christian courts, with all that this would imply. Later on, he wholeheartedly welcomed the official conversion of Frank and his followers to Catholicism. Again, Emden welcomed the conversion of this Jewish sectarian, if you want to call it, heretical group into Catholicism. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Because I think this is crucial in order to understand Emden's uncompromising defense of normative Judaism against Christianity and against any form of Jewish-Christian syncretism, any form of antinomianism. And he saw Christianity as the only natural ally, the most important and the principal natural ally of Judaism against this sort of antinomianism. Now, this is a point that has been brilliantly argued by J.J. Schechter and Pavel Machenko. and I highly recommend both of their work. Now, before we start to delve into the texts themselves, I want to say a little bit about Emden and Christianity here. First of all, Emden never wrote a text specifically dealing with Christianity. There is no Summa pro Gentiles, there's no Epistolam ad Christianos. His views on Christianity, although significant, original, and radical, are to be found in writings addressed to his fellow observant Jews. Writings are mostly devoted to attacking Sabbateanism. This was not a public campaign directed at the Christian world and is not an outreach or an attempt at interfaith dialogue. This was first and foremost an internal Jewish, part of an internal Jewish discourse. Second, most of Emden's writing on Christianity are to be found, with few exceptions, in this anti-Sabbatean attacks, and this is crucial. The second point I want to make is that Emden uses the term the Nazarene when he refers to Jesus. Now, this is not a derogatory term, but is simply a demonym of Nazareth preceded by the Hebrew definite article, the prefix, ha-notzi, the Nazarene. As Pavel Machenko has argued, Emden's analysis of the New Testament, including maybe all of the passages asides, can be traced to a polemic written against Christianity in Hebrew entitled The Admission of the Litigant. The work was supposedly written in, I think, 1430, although we believe it was actually written probably in Amsterdam sometime during the middle of the 18th century. And remarkably, although the work is a polemic against Christianity, Emden redeployed this in his support of Christianity. Now, without further ado, this is, by the way, the work that Emden relied upon, the admission of the litigant. We'll get back to it. And without further ado, let's start delving into some of Emden's analysis of Christianity. Now, the first, this is, by the way, my translation. You're welcome to offer suggestions, but can you see I'm going to share the screen now. Just a second. Now, this is my translation of a very characteristic analysis of Emden before we start. As opposed to the Sabbateans who seek the destruction of Jewish souls by uprooting the Torah, the founders of new religions, by which Emden meant Christianity and Islam, rectified the Gentiles but did not vitiate Israel by undermining its people from observing their actions, by which Emden means the commandments of Judaism. On the contrary, they maintained and affirmed with all their might Israel's obligation to observe the Torah as an eternal covenant. Second. It is recognized also that the Nazarene and his disciples, especially Paul, warned concerning the Torah of the Israelites, to which all the circumcised are tied. And if they are truly Christians, they will observe the faith with truth and not allow within their boundary these new, unfit Messiah Shabtai Tzvi, who has come to destroy the earth. Now, this is part of a very important text for Emden, which contains most of his discussions of the New Testament, that was sent to the Council of the Four Lands, the most important, arguably the most important Jewish political organization in Poland. The attempt, Emden's intent was to convince the Council of the Four Lands that the new Sabbatean sect of the Frankists ought to be sort of handed over to the Christian authorities, and they should be dealt as heretics, with all that this would imply. And it is here that we find most of Emden's references to Christianity. Now, can you see the presentation here? Now, Emden goes on, but truly, even according to the writers of the Gospels, a Jew is not permitted to live his Torah. For Paul wrote in his letter to the Galatians, I, Paul, say to you that if you receive circumcision, the Messiah will do you no good at all. You can take it from me that every man who receives circumcision is under obligation to keep the entire Torah. Again, because of these, he admonished in a letter to the Corinthians, the first epistle of the Corinthians, that the circumcised should not remove the marks of circumcision, nor should the uncircumcised circumcise themselves. And then goes on. Many have argued that Paul appears to contradict himself here, but in the Acts of the Apostle, it is mentioned that Paul circumcises disciple Timothy. We see clearly here that the Nazarene and his apostles did not wish to destroy the Torah from Israel, God forbid, for it is written so in Matthew, that the Nazarene having said, and this is the famous, do not suppose that I have come to abolish the Torah, I did not come to abolish it, but to fulfill it, and so on. Emden then repeats that the same claim appears in Luke 16. Hence, Paul does not contradict himself because of his circumcision of Timothy, for the latter was the son of a Jewish mother and a Gentile father, and Paul was a scholar, an attendant of Rabbi Gamliel the elder, a well-versed in the laws of Torah. He knew that the child of a Jewish mother is considered fully Jewish, even if the father should be a Gentile, as it is written in the Talmud and the codes. This is amazing. Again, Emden is arguing here that Paul, in addition to, of course, we know that having been a student of Rabbi Gamliel the elder, was an expert, as it were, on Jewish halacha. Of course, there's an anachronism here. The Talmud was written later on, but by the Talmud, we should probably understand here oral law. So Emden goes on. He therefore acted entirely in accordance with the halacha, Jewish law, by circumcising Timothy. This would be in line with his position that all should remain within their own faith. Now, this is, I think, quite remarkable, but before we go on, I just want to show you a list of all the references to the New Testament that appear here in Emden's work as part of the letter that he sent to the Council of the Four Lands. We see here quite typically of discussions regarding Jewish law within the New Testament. We see references to the fulfillment of the law. We see here discussions of the 7 Noahide laws that are incumbent upon all non-Jews. We see questions regarding whether or not non-Jews should follow kosher law. And we see other discussions regarding, for example, principally circumcision here. Now, it is important to note here that, as you can obviously see, Emden has been quite a bit selective and at times, how should I put it, uncontextualizing in some of the arguments that he has been making here. The argument here, however, is quite shocking, I would say, and even audacious. I mean, simply put, Emden is arguing that Christianity's original intent was to safeguard Torah observance among Jews by undertaking a rather selective, reading of the New Testament. But Emden arrives at the conclusion that Jesus and Paul were staunch supporters of Jewish halacha, of law. They were, as it were, in favor of Judaism for Jews, a phrase that has been on vogue recently. They were, they never believed that any Jew should cease to observe any of the laws of Judaism. Now, for those of you who are well-versed in Jewish-Christian dialogue, there is a very interesting omission here that we would expect to find in any form of, in any text dealing with Jewish-Christian relations. And that is Romans 11, which, as you know, is probably the most important text used in 20th century Jewish Christian relations, theological approaches, Nostra Aetate, the gifts of God are irrevocable, and all of that. The question is, why has Emden chosen not to include this very important passage? And by the way, we know that Emden knew about this passage because even though, as I said before, Emden relied on a polemical text against Christianity for most of his passages from the New Testament, we know that Emden was aware specifically of Romans 11, in case, even if he hadn't read the New Testament, and even if most of his arguments relied on this admission of guilt on this manuscript from the 18th century, we can see here on the bottom left, I don't know if you see the highlighted part, it's in Hebrew, but on the bottom left of this manuscript, we can see very clearly that there's a mention of Romans 11 there. And the question is, why didn't Emden include this in his explanation of Christianity over Jewish-Christian relations? We'll get back to that question in the end, but before we go on, let us see what is it that Emden argues that Christianity offers to the non-Jews. As we have seen, Christianity offers to the Jews the observance of the law. Christianity wants Jews to keep meticulously observing the law that was received by Moses and Sinai, both the oral and the written law. What about non-Jews? Emden goes on. Paul's condemnation of the Gentile man who lived with a stepmother, from Corinthians, is similarly understandable, as such an act is also forbidden to the Noahides. This will also solve the apparent contradiction in the Nazarene's own statement, Nazarene again being Jesus, that Christian scholars have assumed from certain passages in the gospel that he wished to give a new Torah to take the place of the Torah of Moses. How could he then have said explicitly that he comes only to fulfill it? And now this is a crucial point. The writers of the Gospels never meant to say that the Nazarene came to abolish Judaism, but only that he came to establish a religion for the Gentiles from that time onwards. Nor was it new, but actually ancient, they being the 7 commandments of the sons of Noah, which were forgotten. The apostle of the Nazarene then established them anew. However, those born as Jews or circumcised as converts to Judaism, again, this includes converts, are obligated to observe all the commandments of the Torah without exception. Now, just to give a quick background, what are these 7 commandments that Emden is talking about? This is a very important and well-known topic in rabbinic literature, which are the 7 commandments of that God gave Noah following the flood. These are prohibition against idolatry, prohibition against blasphemy, against bloodshed, sexual sins, theft, and prohibition of eating the flesh of a torn from a living animal. And in addition, an injunction to establish a legal system in order to enforce all of this 7 prohibitions. So what Emden is telling us here, in a sense, is that whereas the Jewish people has to follow the law of Moses, given on Sinai, both the oral, the written law, the rest of the world has to follow these 7 Noahide laws, and it is the mission of Christianity, it is the providential role that Christianity plays in history to enforce this among non-Jews. Now, let's go on. Emden goes on to say, for the Gentiles, Jesus reserved the 7 commandments, which they have always been obligated to fulfill. It is for that reason that they were forbidden pollution of idols, fornication, blood, and things strangled. They also forbade them circumcision and the Sabbath, all of this in accord with the law and customs of our Torah, as expounded by our sages, the true transmitters from Moses at Sinai. Now, I want to say 2 things here that are crucial to understand. First of all, we understand it's clear that according to Emden, the 7 commandments are not new in the sense that the New Testament did not invent them. They are scripturally derived. They are divinely ordained. And in this sense, what the New Testament is doing here is reminding the non-Jews that they have to follow them. Now, the second thing that is really important here and is sometimes missed by commentators and Emden is that according to Judaism, unless one converts to Judaism, which is, of course, an option, it is important not to be ritually circumcised or celebrate the Sabbath as a non-Jew. This means that there is a very strict nomian separation between observing the laws of Judaism on the one hand and observing the 7 Noahide commandments on the other. And this is why, according to Emden, as he explains elsewhere, the holy day, the day of rest, the holy day for the Christians is the Sabbath, or we can assume he says, I mean, as he hints elsewhere, for Muslims, it is Friday, not Saturday. And this is why also there's such an emphasis on circumcision as requiring one to fulfill the rest of the Torah, according to the New Testament. And Emden goes on to say, in this respect, it is therefore a habitual saying of mine, not as an hypercritical flatterer, God forbid, for I am, the faithful believer in Israel, and I know well that the remnant of Israel will not speak falsehood. Goes on, that the Nazarene brought about a double kindness in the world. On the one hand, it straightened the Torah of Moses majestically, as mentioned earlier, not one of our sages spoke out more emphatically concerning the immutability of the Torah. Again, this is an amazing, I think, pronouncement on Emden's part. Not one of our sages spoke out more emphatically concerning the immutability of the Torah. And on the other hand, he did much good for the Gentiles, providing they do not turn about his intent as they please, as some foolish ones have done. I will get back to this point of foolish ones, because they did not fully understand the intent of the authors of the Gospels. And what is this good that he has done to the Gentiles? Emden explains, by doing away with idolatry and removing the images from their midst. Jesus obligated them with the 7 commandments so that they should not be as the beasts of the field. He also bestowed upon them ethical ways. And Emden goes on to explain the wonderful ethical content of Christianity in addition, or rather concomitant to the 7 Noahide laws. This is, again, I think quite remarkable, even if we take into account previous Jewish discussions over the role of Christianity, which, by the way, starting from the 16th century, including, for example, in the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch by Moses Israelis and the Mapa, tended to be quite positive. Christianity was seen as non-idolatrous and as playing an important role, at least as far as the non-Jews are concerned. But Emden here is going further than that. He's saying things that are quite remarkable in the sense that, again, not one of our sages spoke more emphatically concerning the immutability of the Torah. The Christians, it goes on, even said to love one's enemies. How much more so to love us, meaning the Jews? In the name of heaven, we are your brothers. One God has created us all. Why should they abuse us because we are joined to the commandments of God, to which we are tied with the ropes of his love? We pray for the good of the entire world, and especially for the benefit of these lands in which we reside, protecting us and observing the Torah. Now, this is important. Note, you members of the Christian faith, how good and pleasant it might be if you will observe that which was commanded to you by your first teachers. How wonderful it is, how wonderful is your share, meaning your share in the world to come, if you will assist the Jews in the observance of their Torah. You will truly receive reward as if you had fulfilled it yourselves. I mean, let's unpack this. Emden is saying here 2 things. I mean, the Christians are not only fulfilling God's will by observing the 7 laws of Noah, the Christians Christians are also fulfilling God's will and receiving their reward by enabling the Jews to observe their to observe the Torah in this sense. So this is, in a sense, a double reward that the Christians receive here, according to Emden. I mean, before we go on, I do want to say some things. I mean, we've talked about the role of Christianity as a safeguard to Judaism and the role of Christianity in introducing ethical monotheism in the world. But do note a couple of things. Emden does not talk about problematic subjects, as it were, from his point of view. He does not talk about the divinity of Christ. He does not talk about the Trinity, the second coming. He doesn't mention the notion, the dogma that salvation comes through Christ alone, or that one mediator between God and man, or that no one comes to the Father except through me. All of these things are absent from Emden's arguments. Moreover, Christianity is not presented as the new Israel. There's no supersessionism, whether hard or soft, as David Novak says. All of that is absent. Now, was Emden unaware of all this? No. Emden, as I've read in other works, for example, in a book called Sefer Shemush, Emden was very well aware of the Trinitarian element within Christianity. Emden was aware that, and I quote here, some Christian sects maintain that their God took upon himself human flesh to atone for their sins. Emden was aware of, again, the incarnation, the Trinity, and the whole, the major dogmas of Christianity, but he chose not to emphasize those as part of his discussion of Christianity. Another question is, was Emden unaware of the long history of anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism within Christian politics, including the Christian church? No, Emden knows about that very well, and he talks about it elsewhere. But however, his claim here, and we'll get back to it, is that this anti-Semitism, this anti-Judaism has been a distortion of true Christianity. Emden argues that the wise ones, as he calls them, among the Christians have always protected the Jews, whereas it is the foolish ones, as he calls them, that have persecuted them. So while anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism have been part of Christian politics, Emden does not see this as a necessary component of Christianity, but rather as an aberration from what Christianity ought to be. I want to move on quickly just to say some more things about the providential role of history, according to Emden. This is a very famous interpretation of that Emden on the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, a very important part of the Mishnah. Now, the original, the part that Emden is interpreting reads thus: Rabbi Yohanan Hassan Lar said, "Every assembly which is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure, and every assembly which is not for the sake of heaven will not endure in the end." Emden's commentary, which I find remarkable, is this: Christianity and Islam have greatly prevailed on the face of the earth and have filled all the corners of the world. Their assemblies, and this is a pun on the Hebrew word knesioteihem, their churches, so assemblies could mean churches, their churches have grown and prospered. They have endured for many years, increasing in strength, conquering all before them and ruling the seas. Christianity and Islam emerged from Judaism and have built their altars on the foundation of our divine religion. Emden goes on to say that this is therefore why the assembly of Christianity and Islam, their churches, their mosques, their religion, as it were, and their geopolitical power is for the sake of heaven and is divinely ordained. And then goes on to say that they have accepted a majority of the 10 commandments, which not only the 7 commandments of Noah, but the 10 commandments, which is even more mosaic and closer to the laws the Jewish observant, in addition to many admirable traits. It is therefore that their assembly has endured to this day, for they have given honor to God, the Lord of Israel, and to his Torah, have made known his glory among the nations who knew him not, and did not hear of his renown. Thus, the reward for their good intentions shall not be denied by heaven. And the two families, meaning Christianity and Islam, have been chosen by God. This is crucial, chosen by God to rule over many peoples and bring them under the yoke of the necessary beliefs, by which Emden, of course, means the Noahide laws. I mean, this is quite remarkable in a number of ways. Christianity and Islam have been, just as Judaism was chosen, the Jews were chosen by God to undertake a specific providential mission in history. And then here is arguing that Christianity and Islam have been chosen by God to undertake a different one. And moreover, that their geopolitical power, the ruling of the seas, the colonial expansion, missionary work, are in a sense divinely ordained. And moreover, I mean, the founders of Christianity and Islam, in addition to respecting Judaism and enabling its the following of Jewish laws, have expanded and have done this great favor to humanity by eradicating, or trying to eradicate idolatry. And he goes on to say, this is also quite remarkable. In addition, Emden claims that Christianity and Islam have done a great favor to the exiled house of Israel, for were it not for them, the small crumbs of Judaism would have already been consumed, or hope would have been lost among the nations who hate Israel out of jealousy, if it were not for the Lord who protects us by means of the wise men. Again, recall what I said previously about the wise men of the Edomites and the Ishmaelites, meaning the Christians and the Muslims, who acquit us in every generation. The wise ones among them, particularly those Christian sages who always seek the truth, have stood like lions against all those who have risen against us, for they found us to be blameless and have therefore sheltered us. And this is crucial for perhaps ending this part of the lecture. And then goes on to say, O merciful one, let us take refuge under your shade. And if not under your shade, meaning under the exile, that may the exile of the Jews be under Christianity, for they respect Judaism, but not under the shade of the nefarious lineages that have arisen from us, that have disassociated themselves from us. By these, Emden explains what he means by this: the Karaites, the Sadducees, the Pathesians. The Lord's hand was against them, bringing about their ruin and destruction. Consequently, this is crucial, they have not been fruitful in multiplying their communities, in order that their assemblies may wither and their plague not spread among the Jews. And thus, too, the Lord has done to the accursed sect of Shabtai Tzvi. What is Emden saying here? This is, I think, a crucial point. Emden is saying that history, as it were, is a source of, is a way of understanding God's plan for humanity. And we can see from history that the power of Christianity and Islam is part of God's providential plan. Just as we can see from history that the withering or the disappearance of the withering of the Karaites, the disappearance of the Sadducees, and the withering, and hopefully for Emden, the disappearance of the Sabbatean sect is also divinely ordained. And why is this? Because they have not allowed Israel to observe the commandments, because they seek to destroy Israel rather than undertake what they have to do, which is help turn the idolatrous nations into ethical monotheists. Now, just before ending, again, I want to leave you again with the text that we see in To Do the Will of Our Father in Heaven. And again, maybe now we can get maybe a little bit of a better context and a better understanding of how Emden arrived at this. And I want to say a few concluding words here. Emden wanted clear boundaries, absolute nomian boundaries between the followers of the law of Moses and the followers of the Noahide laws, as contained in the Gospels and elsewhere. Emden was radically against any form of syncretism, hybridism, liminality. He wanted clear, impermeable boundaries of that would separate Judaism on the one hand from Christianity and Islam on the other. And this is where Sabbateanism came in. Sabbateanism blurred those lines, whether it's with Shabtai Tzvi's conversion to Islam or with Frank's inclusion of Christian syncretistic elements in his ideas. And Emden argued for an alliance, in a sense, between Christians on the one hand and Jews against all forms of idolatry, by which included, of course, the Sabbateans. Emden, moreover, promoted missionary work, and so the Christian missionary work as essential to Christianity. And in this sense, I think one of the most important elements of Emden's claim can be seen in a not very well-known argument that he made. And with this, I think I will leave you. You Christians should not let the Sabbateans venerate the abominations of Shabtai Tzvi. May the name of the evil ones rot among you, the worshippers of the Nazarene. Now pay attention very well. And the well-known sect has done, as the well-known sect has done when they allowed the people of China to retain their cult of Confucius and let them combine it with the faith of the Nazarene. And this worship of Shabtai Tzvi is far worse than all the pagan faiths that existed in the world. What is Emden talking about here? It is Matthäus Ricci's mission to China by the Jesuits, which was later on condemned, as we know, by the church. And Emden is emphasizing here that this attempt to create a sort of syncretistic form of Christianity between Confucianism and ancestor worship with Christianity is wrong and will not lead to the eradication of idolatry, just as a syncretistic combination between Christianity and Sabbateanism or Christianity and Judaism will never lead to the fulfillment of God's divine plan for history, which is, again, a clear separation of two parallel covenants, one of them for Jews and the other one for the rest of the nations, for the non-Jews. I think we can open the floor for questions here. There's much more, but
okay. Thank you so much, Benny, for a really fascinating, talk. So many things to discuss here. So we have some time for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand, and I'll moderate the questions here. We have one in the Q&A from Don Shapiro, who writes, I frequently attend study of rabbinic texts of all varieties, but to my knowledge, Rabbi Emden's writings are not included. Do you think that that attitude is typical in the modern Jewish intellectual world?
Meaning that it's not included in, no, Emden's writing, his response is very popular and still read in yeshivas today, and especially his commentary on the Jewish prayer book, the Siddur. I mean, it's rather remarkable that for a rabbi that, I mean, his writings are still relevant today in that sense. I think he's still read. Maybe not, maybe you do have to go to more learned rabbinical students, but he's known in the current Jewish world. I don't know if this was the question, though. Yeah.
So, we have a question here from David Salzillo.
Yeah.
David?
Could I ask two questions? Actually, I'll be quick.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. My first question was, in your opinion, how could Rabbi Emden's perspective on Christianity translate to or influence Catholicism's perspective on Judaism? And then I can ask my second question later. Sorry.
This is a very good question. It's a very difficult one, but I think one of the interesting things that Emden does here, as I pointed out, is he never mentions Romans 11, which is probably the most central text in Jewish-Christian dialogue, at least from the Christian side. Now, why is this, I think? I mean, it's because Emden's emphasis is on concrete Nomian observance, whether by Jews or by Christians following the 7 laws of Noah. And Emden did not want to get into questions of salvation or eschatology or soteriology. And the reason, I think, is that he would have to delve into Christian doctrines related to salvation that Emden, as an observant Jew, could not agree to. So in this sense, I think he does point to an important lack of symmetry, I think, in Jewish-Christian theological dialogue, in that the Christians tend to emphasize, again, universal salvation for the Jews, which is very important, a very important element, but the Jewish side is less interested in discussing that because it cannot be done without having to address, again, doctrines that are opposed to Judaism in this sense, which is specifically accepting Christ as the Messiah, the Savior of the world, God, and all of that. So I think Emden, I mean, I have no proof of this. Maybe I will one day be able to prove it, but I think that Emden was very well aware of that, and he decided not to include this in his discussion of Christianity.
And my second question was, how does Rabbi Emden's perspective on Christianity being a religion for the Gentiles match up with the claim, the calls for Jesus to his disciples to go to the lost sheep of Israel, sorry. In text
Again, he's avoiding this. And again, I mean, a lot of Emden's claims do not really hold water. I mean, if I might say so, regarding the New Testament. It was a very selective reading of the New Testament. And some of the claims that he has made could be refuted by bringing out different passages. But I think that Emden decided to focus on what he held to be the shared parallel Nomian mission of Christianity to Judaism, precisely by avoiding those questions. That's at least my hypothesis here.
All right, we have a question from Eugene Korn.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bar-Lavi. How much of all these positive things that Rabbi Emden says about Christianity do you ascribe to his polemic against the Sabbateans, as opposed to him having an innate appreciation of Christianity itself? I mean, as you said, a lot of the things he says don't hold water, not only with respect to the New Testament, but also his reading of history. I mean, it's a real stretch to say that without Christianity and Islam, that the few crumbs of Judaism would have been lost. Another reason I asked the question is that I think that J.J. Schachter, at the end of one of his essays about Rabbi Emden, implies that it was really apologetics more than anything else, because Emden really didn't have a very good attitude toward individual Christians.
So, first of all, I think it's important to make a distinction here that Emden makes repeatedly. On the one hand, Emden held that the wise ones among the Christians, and he keeps on saying this, as opposed to the foolish ones, are the ones who do tolerate Judaism and are the ones who are not oppressive towards it. And this, if you will, sort of a splitting mechanism enables Emden to see Christianity for its potential, rather than for what it has achieved. So in this sense, even though there have been episodes of persecution and anti-Semitism throughout history, according to Emden, and he acknowledges this, he sees these as an aberration from what Christianity could be doing in this sense. He's not denying that these unfortunate episodes have taken place, but he sees them as something that was not essential to Christianity. Whether or not this is justified, that's a different question, but this is Emden's argument. As to your first question regarding whether or not this is related to Sabbateanism, I think that in general, the attitudes toward Christianity at the time were far, far more positive than they had been at any other time in Jewish history. I'm talking about the 18th century. Not only following the 16th century Moses Israel's discussion of this, or the notion of Shitu from the Tosafists, things were starting to change in this sense. What is different from, as far as Emden is concerned, is that Christianity had a role to play in protecting Judaism from its internal opponents, that is the Sabbateans or the Frankists. And this, I think, is what is novel about Emden. And this is why I think Emden went out of his way to emphasize the positive role that Christianity could play within Judaism, internally to Judaism, as opposed to a role of not persecuting Jews or allowing them to observe the Torah. We can have a follow-up question though, if
Well, we have another question in the Q&A from Moses Tversky, who asks, is there any evidence of Rabbi Emden's relationship to other significant rabbis of his time?
Yeah, he was well known, and he corresponded with most of the major rabbis. He fought with probably half of the most important rabbis of his time. Yes, he was not. He might have been an odd bird, but he was not outside of he was not an outsider to the rabbinic establishment, and he was well respected by all the rabbis, even despite his criticisms and despite the huge battle over the Sabbatean arguments that he made against Jonathan Eibeshitz and the Frankists later.
Hey, and I see there's a question from Alan Middleman.
Thank you for a very nice talk, and regards from Hamburg, Germany, where Emden is buried in the Altona neighborhood, the old Jewish cemetery. I understand what you're saying about the so-called Nomian separation between Jews and Noachides, Jews and Christians, on a behavioral level. But I'm wondering philosophically whether he has a theory of the Noahide law, such that the Torah develops from Noahide law. There's a shared basis of ethical normativity between Jews and Noachides, or not. I mean, is the Noahide law just a sort of positive law? And that positive law relates to another positive law, or is there some sort of, theological jurisprudence going on here as such? You see, among people today who make the Noahide law do a lot of work, like David Novak, whom you mentioned.
So, I mean, both according to Emden and Rabbinic Judaism, Noahide law is incumbent upon all of humanity, including Jews. But in addition to that, the Jews received revelation at Sinai, both the oral and the written law. So as it were, if we were to do like a Venn diagram, we have the Noahide law, and we have a subgroup, which is the Mosaic law, the Jewish law in that sense. So it is incumbent upon Gentiles, but Jews, by fulfilling the Mosaic law, are already fulfilling the Noahide law, as it were. And it is ancient, and it has been forgotten, as Emden said. I mean, at least according to his view, all of the nations of the world had knowledge of this law in the past, and they lost this knowledge. And this is, again, where Christianity and Islam come into play.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we are just about at time. So let me once again thank Professor Bar-Lavi for a really fascinating talk today. When he's on campus, I look forward to continuing this conversation about Rabbi Emden. And thanks to all of you who joined us today from every part of the world, or many parts of the world. Thanks for being here. If you'd like to be on our mailing list for upcoming events, you can send an email to jcte@providence.edu. I put that in the chat a little bit earlier. And an event that we have coming up in October 25th, if you want to save the date, will feature Brother Guy Consolmagno, who is the director of the Vatican Observatory, and Professor Peter Salson, who's a professor emeritus of physics at Syracuse University, who is with us here today. And they will be having a dialogue titled Faith and Science, Catholic and Jewish Perspectives on Creation and the Cosmos. And more information on how to attend that, either in person or online, will be held in both formats. Will be forthcoming. Just join our mailing list and you will get information on that. So once again, thank you, Benny. Thank you, everyone. And I wish you all a good afternoon or a good evening. Take care.
Thank you for having me.